catching up with our small business advocate on The Informer. She's been with us almost from the beginning. Her name is Angela Vithoulkas. She's in Sydney and we're going there via Zoom. What a miserable weekend we've just experienced. I want to find out from you, what did you make of the extraordinary decision to close for 5 days? A sudden snap lockdown that crushed business hopes and aspirations over the weekend, because Valentine's Day was going to be one of those weekends, Angela, when people just got a bit of a lift and started to make some money. And suddenly the Premier and his health team have chosen to close the door on this weekend. Why couldn't they hold it up till, say, Tuesday, for example?
So, George, I'm annoyed at lots of different people. I mean, you wouldn't want to be a Victorian for quits, really, because you've got someone who's very volatile there running the state, who on a snap like that, literally it happens like that, he determines the economic fate of millions of people, not just in that state, but outside of that state, because it has ripple effects right around the economy. Now, much as I dislike what Dan Andrews did and the impact that it had, because as you said, it was Valentine's weekend, it was also the launch of Chinese New Year, it was the moon and the stars aligning, so to speak, to be a very big weekend. And we know that the impact from that was millions and millions of dollars of fresh food lost, businesses who had to cancel celebrations. I think there's some stats and data out today that shows that a lot of goodwill, though, was happening where people didn't just cancel their bookings, they've just delayed them for hopefully another day. So that's a positive. The other part that I'm not happy about, though, George, is the third parties who are riding the coattail of this snap lockdown. So there's some business organisations out there who have come forward and have said, oh, this is terrible, there needs to be compensation. You know what I find annoying, though, George?
Go.
It's closing the barn door after the horse has bolted. Why haven't these rules already been set down? So why hasn't Dan Andrews and every other state premier and the federal government said, if we have to call a snap lockdown, if we have to, we don't know why they have to, but if we have to, then here's what's going to happen. Don't worry, we're going to cover this, this, and this. Because there's no point, George, talking about compensation or delivering it 6 months later when those businesses have suffered now.
And not only that, a great many of them are on the precipice. So any delay and any afterthought is just, stuff that is going to damage people. Look, their mental health right now. I've been fielding calls from a host of different people who had set up an opportunity to fly interstate or to fly to New Zealand or to fly anywhere, and suddenly, right in the midst of this, they get trampled on. Now, I think the incredible thing here is the lack of true empathy. And I know premiers and politicians aren't renowned for empathy, but goodness me, they've had a year of this yo-yo, open, close, and they were warning us all the time, we don't want a third one, we don't want a third lockdown. And what did they do? Right in the midst of a most critical weekend that leveraged so many other moments, as you touched on, was absolutely mind-numbing, and people still barking. And even those who are fans of the Premier and understand and want to support him, my goodness, it's a tough time.
If he was the CEO of any other organisation, they would have forced him to step down, given a third wave and the way he's reacted and what it would have cost the bottom line of the business. And everyone else using it as a political football, but not actually coming up with any solid solutions to this economic impact. That's what's also doing my head in.
And also you touched on the federal government. There could well have been some more leadership from Scott Morrison and co.
I think politics is definitely the number one priority of all factions, and they're more than happy to just let Dan Andrews do whatever he wants. And they're still towing the line of saying, JobKeeper's going to finish in March, in another 35 or 40 days. That other lifeline's going to go off the back of all this new debt that these industries that have been impacted the most have felt. So, it's just useless government, more useless government, and ridiculous commentators.
And speaking of that, I can give you a little bit of info. The Premier, the lone Premier in the whole of Australia, has just been nominated for the McKinnon Award for recognition for his excellence.
And some of the judges, though, on that judge that on the panel of the McKinnon Award, that's a little bit questionable as to where their allegiances lie. I think they just want to see, George, the reality is that nobody knows how a politician thinks, because none of us in the real world will ever understand it, thankfully.
Well, I think it's a bit like giving politicians and sportsmen and women a number of gongs. Look, they get rewarded throughout their careers. At the end of the day, you want to give gongs and recognition to people, give it to the frontline working team, the people who've made an enormous sacrifice over the last 12 months and are exhausted and need some support. Speaking of something completely different, there are people I know who are waiting for their couches that were ordered overseas, and there have been some delays. What's the story at the moment with our wharfs? And I'm talking about the Webb Dock in Victoria, and of course the Great Wharf in Sydney, where all the supplies that run the state and everything else need to arrive at and then be moved on. I believe there have been enormous delays, and they're causing even more impact.
So we understand that both New South Wales and Victoria are facing similar problems, not exactly the same, but similar problems, in that there's been deliberate delays of releasing product stuck at these wharves. And there's some stories floating around that there are people that have waited anywhere between 6 to 12 months. So even just before COVID hit, for their product, and it's sitting at the wharves. So it's not that it's taking that long to come from overseas to blame COVID from somewhere else. It's sitting at our docks here, not being released.
So now, what's the sticking point? What's the sticking point?
Well, it depends who you ask, right? Uh-huh. So in Victoria, the unions are stopping. They're going to have some stop work protests, etc. this Friday, and I think the next Friday they're going to stop for 36 hours. They're saying that the disruption of automation and the fact that it's not safe, they want their wages to go up, they want more people employed, yada, 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 yada. And they're going to now put their foot down and say, well, if you don't do what we want, we just won't unload these containers. Now, the interesting thing is that they've stipulated that if there is an urgency, in other words, if something needs to be prioritised, it's food that might go off, or it's PPE, or the vaccines, for instance, if they come that way, they've prioritised, and the union said, okay, we won't stop those from coming. They can come onto the wharf and we'll release them. But as it's been pointed out to me, George, we could see a number of ships floating around the harbour going round and round because only a part of their load can be released as being essential services. The other bits that aren't stay on the ships, and the ships stay in the harbour. So this is like an episode of The Simpsons. It's ridiculous how both states are behaving and not caring about the customer and the end experience again.
Let's see if government and the unions can get together and get this impasse, get past this impasse, and get things moving again, because we do need it. We absolutely do need it. Something else, something light. Have you got something light for us to leave us with this week?
I always like to release a little fun topic, and this week is a lesson. It's a lesson what small business can learn of big business, and it centres around a duke and a duchess. So last week, you wouldn't want to be the editor of the new idea for Quits, would you? Because the editor took a punt and released a cover story saying that the duke and duchess were going to split up. Now, even though we know that they've stepped back from social media, not long after that, a friend of the duke and duchess released a picture on Instagram announcing the fact that they're expecting the arrival of a second baby and how blessed they were, etc., etc. So the lesson here is check your facts. I mean, you would know that as an esteemed journalist, George. Make sure you know who your sources are and don't jump the gun. And as usual, most small business owners always think to check to know for sure. I mean, you just have to check Instagram, don't you?
You would have thought. Angela Vithoulkas, our advocate for small business enterprises, just telling it as it is, as she has done each and every week for the past year. Angela, I wish you a speedy week. Hope everything goes well for you, and we look forward to catching up with you next week on The Informer.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well done, bravo.